Henry, I'm going to note that I've been talking about this with the ambassador's office, and I'm going to show a half a dozen PowerPoint images of Ani and a minute or two of cultural.
Peter, can you please hold at this second so we can go live and then, yeah.
Yeah, I have it, Peter.
Okay, at the end of my talk.
David? Excellencies, colleagues, dear friends, it is a pleasure to welcome you to the virtual discussion presented by the Permanent Mission of Armenia to the UN on the occasion of the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide, as well as the International Human Rights Day. The purpose of today's conversation is to discuss the method of genocide prevention from the perspective of mass media and communications, which have a central role in shaping attitudes, public discourse, and actions around the risk of atrocity crimes. Now I have the honor to introduce the video message of His Excellency Mr. Ara Ayvazyan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, on the occasion of the observance of the International Day of 9 December. Please play the video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, today marks the 72nd anniversary since the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which empowered the international community with legal framework to prevent and punish what used to be a crime without a name, and came to be codified as the acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. Adopted a day before the landmark human rights document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Genocide Convention thus comes to represent the first international agreement on human rights. Since 1998, Armenia has been leading the international efforts within the United Nations to underpin the significance of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, as well as to construct solid foundations for prevention. In 2015, the UN General Assembly unanimously adopted a resolution initiated by Armenia, which proclaimed the 9th of December as an International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and of the prevention of that crime. The establishment and the regular observance of the International Day of the 9th December adds to the continued efforts of Armenia to promote consolidated international action against the crime of genocide. Today, I am honored to reconfirm, in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs, Armenia's firm resolve to continue to support the mutually reinforcing agendas of genocide prevention and the promotion and protection of human rights. As a member of the UN Human Rights Council, Armenia has declared its strong commitment to prevention of identity-based hate crimes. We all know it too well that as an ultimate crime, genocide is preceded by discrimination, exclusion, intolerance, persistent violation of human rights and freedoms, incitement of hatred on ethnic and religious grounds. The frequent lack of understanding of the importance to timely detect early signs, such as manifestations of hate speech and incendiary rhetoric amplified by the modern means of mass media, and often politically motivated reluctance to address them properly and in timely manner, has limited the collective ability to undertake early action and deliver adequate response to promotion and cultivation of hatred and intolerance. Dear colleagues, 2020 will go into history as a year of major grievances and vulnerabilities. It's been particularly challenging for Armenia and Armenians all over the world. As the world was focused on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, Azerbaijan, with direct involvement of Turkey and foreign terrorist fighters and mercenaries from the Middle East launched a large-scale military offensive against Nagorno-Karabakh with a clear genocidal intent. State-led policies of denigrating and insulting the victims of past atrocities and construction of distorted historical narratives that seek to justify the deliberate destruction of the Armenian cultural heritage in the region fuel interethnic tensions and undermine prospects of reconciliation. Dear friends, today more than ever, we need genuine commitment and unity of the entire international community to develop a strong and effective system of risk assessment and early warning mechanism. We need to promote education of human rights, tolerance and culture of peaceful coexistence. Here, I would like to emphasize the role of media and communication workers. Their influence and responsibility are becoming increasingly significant in the modern world of information technologies. They stand at the heart of early warning mechanism to detect and prevent crimes against humanity. The resolution on genocide prevention adopted by the UN Human Rights Council in June 2020 highlights that free, diverse, and independent media able to operate freely would significantly reduce the risk of genocide. This is a crucial time for all of us, time to fully assume our responsibility to prevent and to protect, time to act. This year has shown how fragile and endangered are human life, human identity, human heritage. We are grateful to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his commitment to sustain focus on the prevention agenda and for supporting the critical functions of early warning and early action, including the commitment to address hate speech at the national and global levels. I want to welcome Ms. Alice Wairimu Naderitu in her new capacity as Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the prevention of genocide, and to thank her and her predecessors for the consistent action towards driving forward the prevention agenda. I also thank Under-Secretary General for Global Communications, Ms. Melissa Fleming, for her participation and for supporting efforts aimed at raising awareness about the importance of remembrance and prevention of atrocity crimes. Finally, I want to thank our permanent mission in New York for bringing together an exceptional panel of humanitarians as part of the annual observance of the Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and International Human Rights Day. I thank you.
I thank Minister Ayvazyan for his statement. Today's virtual event will seek to debate the existing and emerging trends in mass media, communications, and culture, insofar as prevention of atrocities and their precursors is concerned, linking human rights, media communications, and humanitarian agendas. As it is known, crises, atrocities, and genocides do not occur overnight. They are detectable and predictable. Denial of past crimes, impunity, discrimination, and prevalence of hate speech are amongst the precipitating factors leading to massive crimes and conflict and represent explicit early warning signs. While the rise of digital technologies has enhanced access to knowledge and factual information, it has also enhanced opportunities for manipulation, misinformation, and proliferation of divisive narratives for political gains. The past few months have seen the largest military escalation in Nagorno-Karabakh conducted at the time of global pandemic and in parallel with unprecedented infodemic, resembling in a way the Armenian genocide that was perpetrated in 1915 under the cover of World War I. Sadly, too often mass media is used to promote hate speech, warmongering, and denialist narratives, or even worse, serving to justify or whitewash past atrocities, breeding culture of impunity and recurrent violence. Despite continuing efforts of international community to prevent genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, mass atrocities continue to persist, often preceded by a range of detectable warning signs. As the main sponsor of the UN General Assembly resolution instituting the International Day of 9th December, Armenia is fully committed to strengthening this important platform, most notably through thematic events held in observance of the day since its establishment in 2015. Indeed, the topic of today's panel is central to addressing the very many challenges and disturbing realities of our times in so many parts of the world. I'm very glad that today we are joined by Ms. Alice Wairimu Nderitu, the Special Advisor of the Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, and Ms. Melissa Fleming, the Under-Secretary General for Global Communications, whom I would like to thank for their important contribution to driving the prevention agenda forward. I would also like to warmly welcome our very special and distinguished panelists. Dr. Sarah Brown, Executive Director of Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education. Dr. Brown has developed and managed the Eyewitness Program for Shoah Foundation, which provides access to more than 1,500 full lifetime histories, testimonies, or survivors and witnesses to the Holocaust and other genocides. We are very honored to have Ms. Terry George, award-winning film producer and director whose works include, among others, such movies like The Promise, Hotel Rwanda, Reservation Road. I'm thankful to David Phillips, Director of Peace Building and Rights Program Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University, to be with us today. We have also Dr. Peter Balakian, Professor of Humanities at Colgate University, author of many award-winning books and recipient of Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. I'm very happy that Dr. Simon Adams could join us, who is the Executive Director of Global Center for Responsibility to Protect. And of course, Dr. Henry Thoreau, President of the International Association of Genocide Scholars and Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, Worcester State University, who kindly agreed to moderate today's discussion. I now have the pleasure to invite Special Advisor of UN Secretary General on Prevention of Genocide, Ms. Alice Wairimu Nderitu, to deliver her remarks. Please, Madam and Secretary General, Special Advisor.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, Ambassador Muher Margarian, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking the Permanent Mission of Armenia for organizing this event to mark the 72nd anniversary of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide and of the Prevention of this crime. This is the second event to mark this day, and we have just finished our commemoration event this morning. So allow me to take this opportunity to also thank Armenia for its support to the Prevention of Genocide mandate. Armenia played an important role in the adoption of General Assembly Resolution 69-323 that established the International Day, which we are commemorating today. Armenia also supported the adoption of several Human Rights Council resolutions on the prevention of genocide, helping to bring attention to this important issue. This day provides us with an opportunity to take stock of the gains that have been made in the prevention of genocide, the most egregious international crime, but also, and importantly, the many challenges that remain. This is particularly important this year, as we are also commemorating 75 years since the creation of the United Nations, an organization born, as we know, out of the ashes of the Second World War and the Holocaust. We know that despite the promise, of never again, and despite significant achievements made over the past 75 years, including a robust international legal framework for the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide and other atrocity crimes. Despite this, we have too often failed to protect victims, survivors, and their families, many of whom have yet to receive accountability and reparations from the scourge of this crime. We are also far too often failing to protect populations at risk of these crimes. On an almost daily basis, we are witnessing gross human rights violations, the escalation of massive displacement of populations, and targeting of civilians in conflict in different parts of the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the huge gaps in structured discrimination that are threatening peace and security in various parts of the globe. I urge all actors to heed the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire and prevent and halt the commission of atrocity crimes. Effective prevention is an ongoing endeavor that requires continuous vigilance. We know that the best prevention is early prevention. By building societies that are inclusive, where discrimination is not tolerated, human rights are protected, and the rule of law respected, we are also building the foundation for atrocity prevention. Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of today's event on mass media and genocide prevention is very timely. Media plays a critical role in our societies. Independent, plural, diverse, and inclusive media helps to educate us and inform us how we view our societies and the world. It provides us with facts and helps to build leaders accountable. It can also be an important tool for populations at risk of atrocity crimes to make their voices heard and mobilize action for prevention. Likewise, the expansion of social media has provided opportunities to connect people in ways that were not possible just a few years ago, and provides us with a wealth of information and knowledge at our fingertips. Unfortunately, we are also witnessing the misuse of media, both traditional and social media, with a detrimental impact, including disseminating hate and promoting division among ethnic, religions, and national groups in various regions of the world, and in the most serious cases, contributing to incite violence or even genocide. Hate speech has been a precursor to atrocity crimes, from the Holocaust to the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica. In all these situations, media was a key tool used for the dissemination of hate speech, incitement, as well as dehumanizing and discriminatory rhetoric. Regrettably, over the past several years, there has been an exponential surge in the use and spread of hate speech, including xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Muslim hatred. Social media has compounded this dangerous trend to alarming levels. We must do more to reverse this trend. I am glad that the Secretary General has made tackling hate speech a key priority, and that under the leadership of my predecessor, Adama Dieng, a UN system-wide strategy and plan of action to counter and address hate speech was adopted in June last year. Let me conclude by reiterating again the importance of this day for the commemoration of the victims of genocide. Let us honor these victims through our renewed commitment and action. I thank you and wish for fruitful deliberations today. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here with you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Madam Special Advisor, for your powerful message. And I very much appreciate the central role played by the Office on Genocide Prevention and Responsibility to Protect, including, as mentioned, in elaborating the United Nations strategy and plan of action on hate speech. And I want to also recognize the important work carried out by your predecessor, Adama Dieng, and we're looking forward to continue our long-standing, long-established cooperation with the office. And Armenia stands ready to support the strengthening of the capacities and independence of office. I have the pleasure now to give the floor to Ms. Melissa Fleming, the Undersecretary General for Global Communications, to address the panel. Please, Madam Undersecretary General.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. His Excellency Maher Magarion, who is the permanent representative of Armenia to the UN, as you all know. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Alice, very much looking forward to working with you on implementing the hate speech strategy, and also welcome to the UN. It's an honor to take part in this discussion organized by the Permanent Mission of Armenia to mark the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the victims of the crime of genocide and of the prevention of this crime. The department that I lead, the UN's Department of Global Communications, manages dedicated outreach programs on, for example, the Holocaust and the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, with both aiming to ensure that these atrocities will never happen again. Of course, this is easier said than done. We live in a time of increasing tensions, with some leaders willing to further divide us with inflammatory language and actions. And we live in an era of social media, when a single post or image, no matter how inaccurate or hateful, can travel at lightning speed around the world. Yet using mass media to encourage hatred and genocide is not a new phenomenon. We know that the Nazis in Germany, just like the Hutu extremists in power in Rwanda, were adept at using the media to isolate and marginalize those they considered less than human. In both cases, the messages of hatred were not hidden. They were evident in the language and tone used in the newspapers and in radio broadcasts. And in both cases, any voices of opposition were largely absent from the mass media, silenced by authoritarian regimes. These experiences and others, such as the actions of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 1970s, show that words can have enormous destructive power. Indeed, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda recognized this in one case in which members of the media used the radio to sow hatred against Tutsis and others. The judges concluded this, quote, "Without a firearm, machete, or any other physical weapon, you caused the deaths of thousands of innocent civilians." Today, the same techniques, generalizations, name calling, fear mongering, and repetition of falsehoods are being used by those wanting to generate hatred, justify human rights breaches, and encourage violent acts. The tools might be slightly more sophisticated than before, but the basic approach is the same. The current economic situation globally means that it's also becoming harder and harder for independent media to thrive. We face a much narrower range of voices in the media and an increased risk of minority voices being left out or demonized. This is true for almost any subject, not just genocide. The COVID-19 pandemic, for instance, has raised global awareness of the fatal dangers of mis- and disinformation. False information about the virus, how it spreads, how to minimize it, and also, most recently, the safety and purpose of the coming COVID-19 vaccine has spread around the world, particularly and most egregiously through social media. The pandemic demonstrates that we need access to trusted, accurate information that promotes science and real solutions, and also values and builds solidarity within and between countries, as well as in local communities. That is why the UN and my department launched the Verified initiative earlier this year, partnering with the social impact organization Purpose, and with the help of all kinds of media partners worldwide and over 110,000 information volunteers, our kind of digital first responders around the world who are helping us to spread fact-based, science-based content and compelling, useful policy information about COVID-19. So with the help of those information volunteers sharing the content with their friends and peers, Verified has now reached over 1 billion people in over 100 countries. And I just raised Verified as an example of the kind of collaboration needed to take on a more dangerous killer, the hate speech and intolerance that can lead to genocide and other human rights atrocities. We need urgently a collective effort that brings together government, civil society, media entities, businesses, and citizens themselves to counter the hate and respond with positive examples of solidarity and support. Like the purveyors of COVID-19 disinformation, those who seek to demonize others and provoke hate-filled violence can be very sophisticated with their messaging and content. We need to be just as good, and in fact, even better, to win this information war. The UN, through its big data initiative called Global Pulse, has been developing and deploying operational analytics to monitor online xenophobia, discrimination, and hate speech for several years. Global Pulse leads efforts to develop system-wide AI-powered platform for early detection and response to this content, whether online or in radio talk programs. Combating hateful content must also include working with the social media platforms on which this content lives and thrives to identify and take down hate speech and other misinformation and disinformation that is harmful to our society, and also to urge them to take further measures to stop it from circulating in the first place. While we have all heard the quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it," many times, let's again ask ourselves, what have we learned from the past? What perspectives does history provide to help us in our goal of building together a just world where all can live in peace with dignity, and a world where we can confidently say, "We remember," and also never again. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you fruitful deliberations today.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Madam Undersecretary General, for your address and for the work of your department and for supporting the observance of the International Day and raising awareness about the importance of remembrance and prevention of atrocity crimes. Now I have the pleasure to pass the floor to the moderator of today's discussion, the President of International Association of Genocide Scholars, Dr. Henry Theroux. Thank you, Henry, once again for being with us today to steer this conversation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Margarian, and thank you to your mission for doing something that I think is a very important step in genocide prevention. As a people, as a country that has the experience of genocide 100 years ago, a century ago, to focus your attention with this program and in other ways on prevention in the future, I think really shows the kind of commitment we need. Unfortunately, there are many genocide victim groups around the world, some of whom whose tragedies are well known, and others who are very obscure. But one of the things that I've seen in group after group is a willingness and a commitment to take on the challenges that face other groups today as they're victims of violence, of mass violence, and so forth. And I appreciate that Armenia has taken the lead in this way. It moves this from a political issue to an ethical issue for your country, and I think for the world, and I appreciate that very much. I also am just humbled to follow the two very impressive and insightful sets of remarks by two Undersecretary Generals. I don't think I'll ever have that privilege again, so I'm very thankful to follow you. You've highlighted some crucial issues that I think are going to be taken up on the panel. I've been asked to just give a little bit of context to our panel and then to open it up to each of the panelists to make their presentations. When I think about the issue of communication, of media, of speech around genocide, I always go back to Terence Day Prey's 1986 article on governing narratives, which particularly focused on denial of the Armenian genocide, but applies equally well to so many cases, unfortunately, of denial of past genocides. And among other insights in that work, one of the things that they pray says is that if you go back into the early modern period in Europe, and you can go in other areas of the world and find this as well, that the opening of speech, the development of ideas of freedom of expression, artistic expression, and so forth, were actually incredibly crucial to the democratization of wide parts of the earth. That allowed a kind of participation, a popular participation and understanding of political rights and political movements that really had not been seen for a while, at least, or maybe ever before. But what he argues is, especially after World War II, the powers of oppression, the anti-democratic powers in the world, the forces, I won't say of evil, but of repression, began to understand in a very sophisticated way, the way that speech works, the way that media works, the way that freedom of speech, freedom of expression can actually be turned back against the very marginalized populations who had used it so effectively to democratize, to challenge authoritarian systems and so forth. And what he argued is by the 1980s, we were seeing a kind of a backlash where free speech, which had once, even in the civil rights movement in the United States, had been a tool of resistance and progress, had been adopted as a method to actually roll back progress, as a method of repression. In the 1970s in the United States, for instance, we saw Nazi speech being protected as free speech. And many other kinds of things. If some will recall that when Radio Libre de Mille Collines was engaging in direct incitement to genocide, one of the arguments that was used to prevent jamming of that radio station, of its participation and perpetration of the Rwandan genocide, was free speech, that we can't stop people from speaking. So we have a challenge. As much as open, artistic, intellectual, and political discourse is crucial to our political, our social, our cultural lives, it is also very much a double-edged sword. With the rise of the internet and what we'll say the ability of just about anybody to, through various means, command a huge audience in areas all over the world, we're seeing this challenge increase. We see it as a tool of denial of past genocides, and as we've been discussing, as a tool of hate speech. Hate speech is now very easy, not just to speak, but to disseminate widely in a way that can motivate groups to do violence. What I'm really excited about as I look at our panel is a set of activists, of academics, of artists, of practitioners who in different ways have had a tremendous impact in tapping the potential for the freedom of expression that we have to really work for human rights and against genocide and other types of mass violence and oppression. When I look at Sarah Brown and her work with testimonies, for instance, and museums and that type of thing, we see the power of finding a new way to communicate, allowing victims of genocide, survivors of genocide, to communicate directly with people decades and even half a century later, after they've passed away, which we cannot overstate. This kind of communication is crucial. When I see David Phillips, I see someone who has been exemplary in understanding how to tie careful factual analysis and reason into very emotion-laden and at times very violent contemporary situations, right? So he's figured out a way, and again, I know he would like to have more success, we all would, but he's figured out a way to intervene that can help change discourse away from the kind of rhetoric that we've been talking about. When I look at Peter Balakian, I see someone who's been a best-selling author of memoir, of academic work, and a poet who's won the Pulitzer Prize. Someone who's used just about every kind of written communication form, to address different aspects of human rights issues and to communicate to where people are at. When I see Mr. George and the use of films, the aesthetic principles, I see someone who has been able to communicate to audiences not only broader than would be possible from an academic standpoint or some other way, but in a way that somehow connects both a beautiful aesthetic, a meaningful aesthetic. Sometimes I feel guilty watching his films because thinking of The Promise, for instance, some of the cinematography is just gorgeous, and yet it's about genocide. But to be able to meld a way of communicating through aesthetic form, meaningful artistic expression, some of the hardest and most challenging things that we as human beings need to confront. And the way to get that to different generations, to get that to different populations who would otherwise never even understand the issues that are so central to some of his work. And finally, with Dr. Adams, I cannot overstate, I'm going to use the term sea change, that the idea of the responsibility to protect has offered over the past 2 decades. This has given us a concept in which we can reframe discussions about vulnerability, about human rights, away from centuries of protection of human rights abuse based on state sovereignty, to a whole new range of discussion that he's been able to be one of the key people in the world in advancing, a way to actually change how we respond to ongoing mass violence in a way that can actually stop it from continuing. Anyway, I could say more in praise of all of our members, but I think at this point I'd like to turn the program over to Dr. Brown, who will share her tremendous insights. So thank you all, and thanks also to the audience for being here today. We really appreciate your attendance. So.
Thank you, Dr. Terrio, and thank you to Ambassador Magarian for the generous and kind invitation. Thank you to the Undersecretaries Flemming and Indiritu, and to my co-panelists, and for everyone that's here, and a very warm thank you to the Permanent Mission of Armenia to the United Nations for hosting this forum. And congratulations on your role in ensuring today is internationally recognized as the day of commemoration and dignity of the victims of the crimes of genocide and of the prevention of this crime. Today also marks the 72nd anniversary of the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. It's a historic document and the first of its kind to be adopted by the United Nations General Assembly so many years ago, but it is still very relevant today. The concept note that drives today's panel really succinctly lays out the challenges and potential of mass media when addressing genocide prevention in our rapidly globalizing world. And as I considered both the promise as well as the peril of the digital age, I reflected on my own research and work and hope to share a bit of that with you today. Much of my own research focuses on the nefarious uses of mass media, in particular broadcast radio and print periodicals. These were the so-called mass media of the time in 1994 Rwanda, my area of research. And my work examines how they were harnessed to disseminate lies about the Tutsi and whip up fear and anger. Media mobilized and sensitized the population to violence. And extremist media outlets knowingly and deliberately targeted and demonized Tutsis as an ethnic other, thus promoting divisions between people that shared the same culture, language, religion, and country. Media popularized dehumanizing rhetoric about the Tutsi, referring to them as snakes and cockroaches, and the media encouraged patriotic Hutu Rwandans to take up arms against their friends, neighbors, and even family members. And they went on to deny the genocide even as it was occurring. That steady onslaught of image, print, and radio influences before and during the genocide invoked terror and anxiety, and the result was devastating. Over a period of less than 100 days, more than 1 million people were brutally murdered in what is now known as the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. This example embodies the peril of mass media, but I also want to share what occurred post-genocide and the myriad ways that mass media has been used to promote reconciliation and reconstruction in Rwanda and beyond, helping to prevent genocide worldwide. Even after the genocide in Rwanda, print periodicals, broadcast radio, and more recently and increasingly television, and of course, social media, have been used to rebuild the country and its people. Radio soap dramas like Musekeweya, which means New Dawn in Kinyarwanda, are transmitted and focus on positive psychological messages that help individuals resist hate speech and incitement to violence, and they also help to promote peaceful coexistence. Social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook have eliminated some of the bureaucratic barriers that were previously in place. They enable Rwandan citizens to directly reach their elected officials and address everything from damaged roads in need of repair to health, security, and post-genocide healing and commemorative practices. Mass media and mass communication technologies have also helped to foster a shared sense of community among Rwandans living in the diaspora who remain deeply vested in their home country. And it offers a space for vibrant and often passionate civic discourse and engagement. Moving to more current times, I must also note that in this year in particular, we have witnessed again the tremendous potential of mass media, in particular via virtual platforms, when it comes to innovative genocide prevention initiatives. We live in difficult times, politically charged and often fraught times, and at my center, the Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education, we know firsthand that the need for meaningful and impactful education about genocide and human rights is all the more pressing today. For the past 41 years, we have worked to promote the elimination of anti-Semitism, racism, and all forms of prejudice through innovative education. And in normal times, pre-March 2020, these efforts would have included educational programming, our exhibit about the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, and the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, our 6,000 volume library dedicated to Holocaust and genocide studies, and our Holocaust and genocide archives. But because of the pandemic, like many other organizations, we were forced to close our doors. It was not the time, though, to lose hope or choose the path of inaction. Instead, we continue our work, bridging the gap between the lessons learned from our genocide survivors and their surviving generations, and the lived experiences of our current leaders, and perhaps even more important, the next generation of leaders who sit in our classrooms today. Even as we socially distance and isolate ourselves in order to stay healthy and safe, we find ways to come together as a community to combat rising xenophobia, hatred, bigotry, and hate speech around the globe. And thanks to the tremendous technologies of our times and the limitless opportunities that mass media in particular represent, we have been able to persevere. At Change, my center, that's Change with 2 H's, we immediately transitioned our programs to virtual platforms, and those have reached now over 37,000 people across 6 continents. We have been able to expand our reach to include a global network of learners, educators, and activists who are working together to promote real and lasting change. Harnessing mass media, we focus on the human story of genocide, fostering an interpersonal connection between learners young, mature, and lifelong, with events in history that may otherwise feel temporally or physically distant. Equally important, we impart necessary skills that help our community resist hate speech, dehumanizing rhetoric, and the us versus them paradigm often promoted by extremists in an effort to sow divisions, isolate a targeted group, and facilitate their destruction. The lessons we learn from the stories of survivors of genocide include not just the cautionary tales, and I really want to emphasize that, but also positive moral messages. Hearing about and from individuals who played a role in preventing or addressing genocide provide us with role models we can emulate and positive examples of who we could and should become. One example that came to mind for me when thinking about today's program was that of Armin Wegner, a hero who is featured in our exhibit at Change. Armin Wegener served as a German army medic during World War I, and he witnessed the Armenian genocide. Despite Turkish efforts to suppress any evidence, he documented what he had seen both in his diary and with his camera. When he returned to Germany, he smuggled out and published his notes and photographs, comprehensive and conclusive evidence of the genocide that we continue to use today. It is cited by scholars, advocates, and more recently by the US Congress when deliberating and eventually passing historic resolutions that recognize the Armenian genocide. Wegener continued to advocate for human rights, and in 1933, soon after the Nazi-sponsored boycott against Jewish-owned businesses, he wrote an open letter to Hitler condemning the boycott and demanding Nazis stop persecuting the Jewish people. I sometimes wonder if today he would have sent a tweet. Excuse me, sorry about that. Soon after the letter reached Nazi headquarters, Wegener was arrested, tortured, and eventually incarcerated in 7 concentration camps and prisons. He later escaped to Italy, and there he was largely forgotten. But we remember and we honor him today. And we will continue to teach people, now using mass media, how Armin Wegener was an upstander, a hero who risked his life during 2 infamous periods in modern history, when most stood by and were silent as millions were murdered. We're grateful that there are so many like-minded people in this audience and on the panel, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for your important and interesting remarks. And also thanks to your son for a quick guest appearance, which I think reminds us in the midst of discussing genocide and the horrors that we all bear witness to as we think about the past and present, that there's also a positive side of life, and there's the possibility of rebirth and the future. So thank him for me. Maybe not now, but in 10 years, he'll understand. From this, we'd like to actually move on to Terry George, and to open his segment, we've got queued up a short part of the film, The Promise. I think that's ready to go. So we will turn that over, and then we'll be very excited to hear Mr. George's comments on that and his general comments as part of the panel.
Mr. Myers, I am Faruk Pasha, commander of this region. What is the Associated Press doing here, Mr. Myers?
Reporting on the war.
There is no war here. Merely the evacuation of the civilian population to a safer region. The gallant Armenian partisans of Van put up a heroic resistance against Turkish divisions, inflicting heavy casualties. Hardly objective reporting. This is my favorite. A Turkish official, a man of unshakable humanity and courage, informed us that Faruk Pasha, a general notorious for barbarism, has been instructed by the highest authorities to spare no village. Are these words your fabrications, or the words of some lying Turkish traitor? Prove to me that you did not fabricate these words. Give me the name of the high-ranking Turkish official. I will confirm he gave you this information and release you.
No.
You are not a journalist. You are a foreign agent. You insist there is war here? Very well. Under the military code of war, I'm obliged to execute you as a foreign agent and a collaborator. Now, was that my barbarism or mercy? Take it.
Very chilling. Thank you for sharing that. Mr. George, the floor is yours. I think you're still muted. I'm sorry.
Okay, there we go. How's that? Okay, thank you. Just I wanted to thank the ambassador, the undersecretaries, and all of our panelists for this important discussion on this important day. I think, you know, the films I have made and other films, most notably Schindler's List and The Killing Fields, are, while they're about genocide and are set in the enormous genocides of the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, Rwanda, Armenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. The stories themselves are actually about empathy and about ordinary people. They are there to convey what happens to ordinary people in these most horrific situations. And I think that their success, and often I have people who say to me, I never knew what happened in Armenia, or I didn't know what happened in Rwanda until I saw Hotel Rwanda, or indeed Schindler's List and The Killing Fields tend to be the medium through which most people around the world have encountered those horrific events. And each time, again, it's about getting to know ordinary working class people, whether that's Oskar Schindler or the journalist in The Killing Fields and the other victims around them. And I think that once you use drama or documentary to inform people, to build up empathy about others around the world, minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities who are suffering, then you can go a long way in the prevention of genocide. Because knowing another person, seeing them, understanding how they live, how their families are, how they interact, makes it so much harder for the perpetration of genocide. And I feel that that drama, particularly the medium of film and documentary, is possibly one of the most powerful weapons that we have against genocide, because it creates a barrier to hate. It creates a barrier to cruelty. It creates a barrier to extremism when you have a sense of what the other person is. And I do worry today that the emphasis, particularly in the medium of film and television, has moved away from nonfiction drama towards fantasy, and that this it stops us producing literature and film and television that will help create empathy. And I want to appeal to the audience itself and to everyone to encourage the promotion of a cinema, particularly, which is under siege today because of the pandemic. Within the medium that I work, we're not sure that when we emerge from this pandemic that the actual institution of cinema and theaters will exist in the way it did before. And yet it's essential to the cause of human rights and the cause of understanding what goes on in nations around the world. And I think that sense, and it's also, and the other panelists mentioned this, it's extremely important in combating the hate speech on social media and so forth, which is created often in isolation. I feel that there's a lack of community, that people are sitting alone and creating fear, creating hate speech, creating this notion that that truths are not to be believed, that science is not to be believed, that what you see before your eyes indeed is not to be believed. And so I think it's important for all of us to understand today that the use of drama in the cause that we fight for is essential. And that requires active participation. That requires people asking their cinemas, asking their television stations, asking or subscribing to important non-fiction drama and important documentaries, that we sponsor these forms of education, and that we actively go out of our way to ensure that not only that they exist, but that they make a profit, that they're supported. Because if they don't make a profit, they will quickly die off. It's much easier to create the fictional superhero with the CGI and enhance it than it is to make a Schindler's List, or to make a Holocaust television series, or to make The Killing Fields. And therefore, all of us together have to actively campaign that we will support this form of drama and support, the literature that Peter Balakian puts out. We are in a campaign to support each other here. And the purpose of that campaign is to promote empathy, understanding. And no better way to get understanding than to create drama that gets inside the lives of ordinary people. I was moved to hear again about Aaron Wegner and the man who wrote 40 Days of Muzadok, much of which I based The Promise on. I'd also like to point out that the making of these films and the work of heroes within these dramas is not without cause and cost. And we've seen that with Aaron Wegner, and we've seen it with Oskar Schindler. And particularly today, I have to raise this. We see this with Paul Rusesabagina, the hero of Hotel Rwanda, who was rendered from Dubai, kidnapped, and now faces trial in Rwanda, a trial that's about to take place on January 26th, where he would be put on trial with 20 people that he never met in his life, and at great cost. Paul Rusesabagina is in prison because of Hotel Rwanda. There's no question about that. And I would appeal to the audience to mobilize around his case. So for me, today, the stories I told, the Armenian genocide, Hotel Rwanda, the great work of Steven Spielberg, and the work is about empathy. And it requires all of us to understand that this is about ordinary people. It's about our neighbors. Genocide is always about our neighbors. They're our neighbors. They're not them. The word them, others, is the antithesis of neighbors. And those are the stories I tell. And I'm thankful today for the ambassador. And I hope people will continue to support drama such as I make, and that we can battle against genocide. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those important remarks that have allowed us to understand your work in a very crucial way. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is David Phillips. So I'd like to turn the floor over to him and eagerly await his remarks.
Thank you very much, Henry. A special word of appreciation to Ambassador Margarian for convening this, to the undersecretaries for participating. I feel honored to participate on this panel alongside such distinguished guests. So thanks for convening this discussion. Very pleased to be a part of it. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. It started with the genocide of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1923, when up to 1.5 million people were deported and killed. Raphael Lemkin, who authored the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, said the term genocide specifically referred to the mass killings of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. He urged Turkey to sign the Genocide Convention as a form of recognition. Sadly, Turkey to this day is fully committed to its denial campaign, which is unrelenting. A second Armenian genocide was launched on September 27th of this year in Artsakh, also known as Nagorno-Karabakh, when Azerbaijani armed forces, supported by Turkish drones and warplanes and jihadist mercenaries, brought to Nagorno-Karabakh from Syria by Turkey, attacked lands that were long inhabited by Armenians. These events, both historical and recent, are interrelated. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan affirmed their connection, vowing, "We will continue to fulfill our duties in the Caucasus, to which our ancestors have been committed for centuries." In addition to its tragic toll on human lives, the ongoing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan has an information war component. Neither country has an official cyber army. However, Armenian government and Armenian websites have been targeted with cyber attacks. Those perpetrating the targeting seek to spread disinformation in order to justify aggression and atrocities. Azerbaijan's social media campaign violates established guidelines of social media companies. Twitter maintains in its charter, "You may not threaten violence against an individual or a group of people." We also prohibit the glorification of violence. Instagram also affirms graphic violence is not allowed, and we may remove videos or images of intense graphic violence to make sure that Instagram stays appropriate for everyone. According to the spokesperson for Facebook, the company waited a year to open investigations on the ruling political party of Azerbaijan that, quote, utilized thousands of inauthentic assets to harass the opposition and to defend the country's governing New Azerbaijan Party by working with the party's youth union. Facebook's head of security points out, this network appeared to engage individuals in Azerbaijan to manage pages with the sole purpose of leaving supportive and critical commentary on the pages of international and local media, public figures, including opposition and the ruling party of Azerbaijan, to create a perception of widespread criticism of some views and widespread support of others. A disinformation campaign that was organized and systematically executed. On October 8th, Facebook deleted 589 accounts. Nearly 8,000 pages were also deleted, as were 447 accounts on Instagram that were engaged in, quote, inauthentic behavior. What's meant by this term? Lies that are organized and sponsored by the state. Not only does Azerbaijan spend a fortune on US-based public relations firms, it also sponsors an online disinformation campaign. Pro-Azerbaijan hashtags are heavily manipulated, with a small group of high-volume accounts responsible for most mentions. Rather than being fully automated bots, they are curated by dedicated human users belonging to pro-regime youth groups. Roughly 1 million pro-Azerbaijan comments on social media were registered between July 12th and the 18th. They were tagged with inflammatory titles such as Stop Armenian Terrorism, Stop Armenian Aggression, Armenia Kills Civilians, Don't Believe Armenia, Armenia Kills Children, Pray for Ganja, Stop Armenian Lies, and Terrorist Armenia. Online propaganda also seeks to harass defenders of Armenia and Artsakh. The Armenian rapper Cardi B and Elton John were attacked for supporting the people of Artsakh. Cardi B admitted that a lot of people from Azerbaijan wrote to her and used the hashtag Cardi B supports terrorism on social media. When Columbia University hosted a discussion with Armenia's ambassador to the United States, in the span of 10 minutes, we received 150 messages, orchestrated and all similar in their nature, urging Columbia to pull the plug and stop the program. Azerbaijan's entrenched state propaganda apparatus has long used computational disinformation and patriotic trolling. Across all of the top pro-Azerbaijan hashtags, dozens of accounts tweeted well over 1,000 times between July 14 and 18, with some accounts posting over 100 times a day. As Azerbaijan's political astroturfing operation is run by a small coordinated group of accounts that post at a high volume to create the impression that the online movement has more organic support than it actually does. A great proportion of hyperactive accounts were engaged during the period just prior to Azerbaijan's attack on September 27, suggesting they were orchestrated to support Azerbaijan's premeditated aggression. So any claim that violence was spontaneous can be refuted by the systematic use of social media to prepare the groundwork for propaganda. Most of these profiles were anonymous, featuring pictures of the Azerbaijan flag or other national symbols, with no biographical information on the posters. Evidence also exists of systematic retweeting by, for example, the General Union to Youth for Support, a youth organization created in 2019 to boost President Ilham Aliyev's youth development policy. Propaganda is also conducted by Azerbaijani officials. Aliyev's foreign policy advisor, Hikmet Hajiev, circulated fake images as a military analysis. He circulated the image of a Smerch missile that landed in an Azeri kitchen. The missile hit a table, but didn't destroy the table or explode, leading to speculation that the image was photoshopped. It's my view that it surely was. Azerbaijan's information warfare is also directed against Azerbaijani citizens. The pro-regime youth movement, Ireli, is known to operate on many different accounts, harassing journalists and critics of the regime. It also runs a, quote, social media academy to train youth in propaganda. Ireli was originally funded and sponsored by the Azerbaijani government, using its oil wealth derived from the sale of hydrocarbons to Western markets. Freedom House documents Baku's control over the information and communications technology industry. The Azeri government manipulates the online information landscape, blocking websites that host unfavorable news coverage. Digital rights are abused in Azerbaijan. Those who voice dissent online can expect prosecution if they reside in the country, or various forms of intimidation if they live abroad. According to the Azerbaijan Internet Forum, internet users in Georgia and Russia enjoy 10 to 20 times the internet speeds of their Azeri counterparts. Columbia University's president, Lee Bollinger, expressed concern that, quote, social networking's most dangerous human impact is that it can create more polarization, generating increasingly less room for debate and constructive discussions, which threatens our social fabric and democracy itself. Listening to the panelists, we all have one thing in common. Our work is devoted to bearing witness. To ensure fair and balanced information, the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia University recently launched a website titled ARTSOC Atrocities in conjunction with the ARTSOC Human Rights Ombudsman. The site includes credible reports by the ARTSOC and Armenian Human Rights Ombudsman, news articles, opinion pieces, statements by the International Committee of the Red Cross, and other authoritative humanitarian and human rights voices, as well as videos, including some with gruesome imagery, as well as documentation of Azerbaijan and terror groups targeting churches and cultural symbols. The ARTSOC Atrocities page is a counterweight to Azerbaijan's propaganda infrastructure. It represents an effort by Columbia University to make sure that the voices of Armenian victims are heard. We are routinely attacked by Azerbaijani propagandists. Not a day goes by when I don't receive some kind of hate message for my advocacy on behalf of Armenian victims. I already mentioned that when we hosted the Armenian ambassadors, we were assaulted by hundreds of messages condemning our work. These messages not only complain about Columbia's advocacy, they fundamentally object to the term ARTSOC, which to me is rather remarkable, since these are traditional Armenian lands, and this is the traditional Armenian term to them. The Azeri government and its propagandists act like other perpetrators. We heard from Terry George reference to different genocides. In most, the perpetrators first deny. When confronted with evidence, they question its credibility. When they claim that injuries were self-inflicted or that victims' groups perpetrated the identical or worse crimes against them. All of this in an attempt to obfuscate the truth, to rewrite history, and to prevent consequences for their actions. We believe that the information that we provide on the ARTSOC Atrocities webpage not only memorializes the truth, it also serves as a resource for enhancing accountability. And we hope that it will be used by prosecutors when the perpetrators of these war crimes are brought before a tribunal and have to face justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Peter Balakian, and I am told he has slides to share. So we'll see those as we go through his discussion.
Thank you, Henry. I'll probably save the slides for the very end. Thank you, Ambassador Markarian, members of your staff at Armenia's permanent mission. Henry, thanks for taking charge of the panel and panelists. I'm delighted to be with you. I'll speak at as briskly a pace as I can to cover ground. As we commemorate the 73rd anniversary of the UN Genocide Convention, oh, did I say 73rd? I think it's 72nd. I want to note that its primary author and activator, the great legal scholar Raphael Lemkin, a Holocaust survivor from Warsaw who lost 49 members of his family to Nazi genocide, found that the case of the Armenian genocide of 1915, carried out by the Ottoman Turkish government, was seminal to his formulating the definition of genocide And it should be noted as well that it was Lemkin who coined the term Armenian genocide around 1943. I want to note as well that the efforts to rescue and bring relief to the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire, starting during the era of Sultan Abdul Hamid's 1890 Armenian massacres, through the period of the Ittihad government's final solution for the Armenians, that this arc of intervention became America's first international, and that's the key word, human rights relief movement. And the role of media here was crucial. There's much to say about it, but not for this moment. Many American milestones happened during this time. A couple to note. In 1915 alone, the New York Times published 145 articles about the Armenian atrocities, a number of them front page headlines. The Near East Relief Foundation, a US NGO, raised more than the equivalent of $1 billion in relief for Armenians and other ethnic groups suffering as a result of Turkish atrocities and human rights crimes. In affirming this record of humanitarian intervention, both houses of the US government passed in the fall of 2019 nearly unanimously resolutions, Senate Res 150, Congressional Res 296, acknowledging the significance of the Armenian genocide as a landmark event in modern history, as well as noting the historic US role in humanitarian intervention and the great work of the Honorable US Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. In our time, we bear witness to atrocities, genocide, human rights crimes in many ways. Witnessing comes in many genres: literary, visual arts, cinematic, digital and photo image, and the language of journalists and reporters. We record and watch atrocities on our screens, TV, cell phone, internet, computer, satellite, drone images. And individual witnesses can make images that go viral. We have at our disposal various modes of digital recording, and events can become mass media, but begin as personal and eccentric image-catching moments. Think of the person whose cell phone camera caught the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in Minneapolis in June. Think of the Armenian Bishop Tupazyan, who captured the Azerbaijan military destruction of thousands of medieval Armenian Khachkars in Julfa in Nakhichevan in 2005. We know that the killing of human beings in whole or part on the basis of their ethnic identity is one aspect of the crime of genocide, according to the UN Convention. But today I want to note the significance of cultural destruction as part of genocide, and to note briefly two cases of Armenian cultural destruction, one in Turkey and the other in Azerbaijan. And then say something briefly or ask the question about Hague protocols of the post-war era. The bigger question is, how do we transmit witnessing from our media captures into actions of intervention and political actions of justice, reparation, and repair? In 1933, Lemkin sent his famous paper to a human rights conference in Madrid. In that paper, he articulated notions of killing and the destruction of culture that would lead to his conception of genocide by the early 1940s. He defined barbarism as acts of extermination directed against ethnic, religious, or social collectivities, and he focused on acts of vandalism as the destruction of culture and works of art. He wrote, "An attack targeting a collectivity can also take the form of systematic and organized destruction of the art and cultural heritage in which the unique genius and achievement of a collectivity are revealed in fields of science, arts, and literature. The contribution of any particular collectivity to world culture as a whole forms the wealth of all humanity, even while exhibiting unique characteristics." And he went on to talk about destroying objects of spiritual life, houses of worship, schools, treasures of art, culture, and there's much more to say about it. Although concepts of culture genocide would be lost in the political parsing and compromise during the formulation of the UN Genocide Convention, these ideas would have significant impacts on later post-war Geneva and Hague protocols. I want to call up two cases of cultural destruction, both Armenian, set in Armenia's own historic land, carried out by Turkish and Azeri forces. About 2,000 Armenian schools, 450 monasteries, 2,500 churches were destroyed by the Turkish state during the Armenian genocide. Hold on one second. Many of the more than 2,500 churches were turned into barns, arsenals, brothels, artillery training areas, restaurants, nightclubs, cafes. And in one dramatic case that is still on graphic display, the ruined and partially reconstructed churches of Armenia's great medieval 10th century capital city of Ani, wedged at the Armenian-Turkish border, has been entirely and deliberately falsified and misnamed as Hittite or Byzantine or Seljuk by the Turkish government's Board of Tourism. The signage and tourist guides and maps are aimed at covering up the factual Armenian identity of the place and buildings. The Armenian writing inside the churches has been painted out. Even the name of the city has been changed in the official Turkish documentation. At the site of Armenia's most important medieval city, there is no designation of Armenia. Can you imagine the Duomo of Florence being passed off as German or Spanish? As has been noted by other panelists, this is the result of the Turkish government's refusal to acknowledge the facts of the Armenian genocide. And as President Obama put it to Turkish parliamentarians in 2019, to come to terms with, quote, the unresolved heavyweight of history. Nakhichevan, an historic Armenian land like Nagorno-Karabakh that was partitioned from the Republic of Armenia in 1921 by Stalin in a divide and conquer imperialist policy with pressure from Turkey, the country that had already destroyed its Armenian population and was still intent on seeing that Armenia in the South Caucasus be reduced to as small a territory as possible. The case of the systematic campaign of Azerbaijan to destroy Armenian cultural heritage in Nakhichevan has been recorded by digital media, video footage, satellite cameras. As art historian Christina Maranchi has written most recently in the Wall Street Journal, between 1997 and 2006, Azerbaijan systematically wiped clean of its culture 89 medieval churches, more than 30,000 Hachgars and tombstones, an act of cultural genocide. The Hachgars of Julfa are extraordinary, complex texts of visual beauty, numbering over 10,000 in their original sighting. And if you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, you'll see a gorgeous Hachgar that'll give you a sense of the importance of these monuments. I'm going to show you some images and then we'll close it. There's a lot to say about the Julfa Cemetery and the destruction. I'm going to show you a YouTube footage from Simon Mahakyan's marvelous work on this act of cultural destruction. I'm going to note that high resolution satellite photographs have confirmed the entire massive cultural genocidal project. And before I close, I want to ask the question, are the Hague Protocols of 1954, 1977, and 1999, and the 1990 Copenhagen Conference of the CSCE, are these codes and edicts and ethical imperatives that can support and initiate international intervention for the sake of rescue, protection, and the proper repair of cultural property that has been destroyed or marred by perpetrators? So I throw that out there. A few images. Ani today. I hope, oops, have I hit share my screen or not? No, okay, sorry. Okay. Share my screen, there we go. Okay. I don't know how the images are presenting, but I hope you can catch them, at least in fair view. The Ani walls, the view from Ani across the border from Turkey to Armenia, the beautiful broken bridge that crosses the river, the Ani grounds, just to show you some of the signs of falsification and eradication, acts of cultural genocide in motion. Not a word of Armenia on the directory for any tourist or viewer. The narrative sign. These are extraordinary monuments, extraordinary pieces of art and architecture. The great main cathedral built by the Armenian architect Turdat in the middle of the 10th century. And I'm going to move fast and just show one more piece. There's so much to say. I'm sorry to scroll through these. Here we go. Some footage of the destruction of the Azerbaijan cemetery, of the Armenian cemetery in Azerbaijan.
These were the last headstones of a medieval cemetery, the last testament to 1,000 years of a people's history. On December 15th, 2005, they were wiped off the face of the earth.
For sake of time, I'll cut that, but let me go back to say that footage came from a witnessing video camera on the other side of the Arax River in Iran by Bishop Topuzyan. So again, just as we hook into notions of media, what can happen when an individual witnesses and sends something viral. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Balakian. And that brings us to our final panelist, who is definitely a last but by no means least person here, Dr. Simon Adams. Dr. Adams, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Henry, our esteemed moderator, and thank you, of course, to Ambassador Magarian and to the permanent mission of Armenia for organizing today's event. And I want to thank all the panelists. It's great to share this panel with you, but at the risk of singling somebody out, I want to especially mention Terry George for his very powerful films, including those about the Troubles in Ireland, as somebody whose family comes from Ardoyne, Your early films meant the absolute world to me and had a huge influence on me and felt deeply personal. So this annual day is an opportunity for us to come together as an international community and honor victims of genocide, a crime that clearly diminishes us all and challenges, I think, our very sense of what makes us human. And I think we should always keep in mind that from the genocide inflicted on the Herero and Nama people of Namibia in 1904, at the very start of the 20th century, to ongoing attempts to destroy entire peoples today, genocide is a crime that must be organized and incited. It doesn't happen naturally. And precisely because it has to be organized and incited, that means it can also be prevented and punished. And today, I think on this day, as we kind of renew our commitment to the prevention of genocide, we must also reinvigorate our understanding of ongoing risks to vulnerable populations around the world and assess our kind of collective capacity to prevent aspiring genocide perpetrators from harvesting fear, from targeting the vulnerable. The 15th anniversary of the adoption of the principle of the responsibility to protect was commemorated earlier this year, as was the 105th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. But I think that the topic of today's meeting is very timely. And as USG Fleming noted, the expansion and the influence of mass media in the digital age, I think, is both a blessing and a curse. In particular, I think we've all witnessed the potential negative impact social media can have on our daily lives, including on the perception of truth, politics, and our common humanity. But I think the expansion of digital communications and social media has also quite obviously allowed us to communicate and connect across borders more easily than at any other time in human history. And again, I think it's that duality of threat and promise, which should remain absolutely central to our understanding of the importance of mass media today. And in this context, let me say that atrocity crimes never happen in a social vacuum, nor are they isolated or random incidents. Genocide and other mass atrocity crimes are preceded by a range of early warning signs. And I think one of the most important of those is the proliferation of hate speech. Hate speech, as we all know, is speech that marginalizes and targets people on the basis of their religion, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, race. Or in other words, it's language that demonizes people, not for anything that they have done, but for who they are. And this was a point that I was glad to see that USG Fleming also made, which is that the propagation of hate speech has taken many forms throughout history as media platforms have evolved. So the Nazis used virulently anti-Semitic newspapers like Die Stürmer to try and incite the German people into the active persecution of Jews. 5 decades later, during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, the RTLM radio station played a key role in promoting hate speech against the Tutsi, inciting the genocide, and in fact, even directing the killers with the names of potential victims who were hiding and had yet to be discovered. And more recently, I think from ISIS to Myanmar's generals, social media has become the tool of choice that has been weaponized to target the other and to incite atrocities. And in this new digital era, I think Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and other platforms are not just places for, information sharing, for discussions about the Great British Baking Show, and for social networking. They are places where vilification, targeting, and incitement take place. And I think a very disturbing example is Myanmar, where in 2017, the military systematically utilized Facebook as a tool in their persecution of the Rohingya minority, something that's been recognized in documentation currently in front of the International Court of Justice in The Hague as part of a historic case alleging that Myanmar breached its obligations under the Genocide Convention. However, just as propaganda and hate speech can be disseminated via mass media, these platforms can also be a crucial element in the prevention of atrocities. These platforms can help cultivate an inclusive public discourse. They can compel humanitarian responses. They can address early warning signs of potential atrocities. So I think we need to harness the potential of social media in particular as a tool for atrocity prevention instead of allowing it to simply be manipulated for malignant purposes. How do we do that? Technology and social media companies need to move beyond ad hoc responses to the ways in which their platforms are being misused. All of these companies, all of them, should employ experts to tackle the problem on their platforms and establish designated staff for monitoring human rights and for hate speech. Governments and multilateral bodies must increase pressure on Facebook, on Twitter, and other platforms to actively stop hate speech from being propagated on networks that operate in their country. And I think the UN Plan of Action and Strategy on Hate Speech provides very strong practical recommendations in this regard. Because I think hate speech is always about forging identities amongst both the targeted and also amongst those who do the targeting. Identities are redefined, they're weaponized, but that means, again, that they can also be contested and that they can also be disrupted. And of course, the upside to the expansion of mass media and digital communications is that it has also allowed us to peer behind closed borders and has given us the potential to expose the crimes of perpetrators like never before. Evidence of what is happening in the darkest dungeon beside the most remote mass grave or inside any killing zone is just one click of an iPhone away. And so I'd like to end by saying that just as not all media is malignant, not all content is equal, there should be no space on any mass media or any social media platform for genocide deniers or for those who want to use those platforms to incite violence and to promote the politics of the machete or the concentration camp or the mass grave. But because I think the antidote to hate speech is speech that promotes and protects everyone's human rights. And in these times of global crisis, with an unprecedented 80 million people around the world currently displaced by persecution, by conflict, and by atrocities, we need mass media who do what it does best, which is to tell uncomfortable truths, expose unconscionable crimes, and report on conflict and human rights in ways that mobilizes empathy and action rather than promoting apathy and indifference to human suffering. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adams. And I did want to say how impressed I was with each of the presentations. And what I noted was some of the themes that sort of weave through them and came through. For instance, Dr. Adams talking about empathy, picking up that issue from Terry George and so forth. I think has been really helpful for us to advance our understanding of the complicated issues around speech, around art, around the positive and negative sides of what expression can do. So thank you so much. I have a great apology, and I'm going to take the responsibility for this as moderator. I have not been as tight as I might have been in terms of keeping us on track time-wise. What that means is because we have one more part of the program, we won't be able to have any time for discussion among the panelists of questions posed in the chat. However, we have saved the chat, and the panelists will be able to reflect on those, and maybe there'll be some other way to get responses. So I very much appreciate that. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the program back over to Ambassador Margarian. And once more with a thank you for organizing this event and for having the vision that you have, which will take us, I hope, closer to a world without genocide, a world without mass violence. So thank you for helping to lead us there. And thank you to our just tremendous panelists for what you've shared with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry, and thank you to all the panelists for the inspirational and very enlightening discussion. I want to thank also to all participants of today's virtual event, our UN colleagues, representatives of civil society, academic institutions, and everyone who took time to be with us on this commemorative day. The event today is being broadcasted on UN Web TV and also on the page of Armenian Mission, and the recording of that will be available to those who would wish to view it later. Dear friends, our program will end with a musical performance by an award-winning talented pianist, Karine Bogosian, who many of our New York colleagues will remember from her beautiful concerts at the Carnegie Hall. Since the lockdown in New York, Ms. Bogosian launched a weekly concert series available on her Facebook page. Karine, thank you very much for being with us today at this solemn occasion. We will listen to the classical piece written by a world-renowned composer, Aram Khachaturian, which will conclude today's virtual event. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the music and stay safe. All the best. Over to you, Karine.